Hello and welcome to our first ever Your Brother Should Know PS, appendix or addendum. If you've never heard of us, check out our episode on Ultravox's Vienna and many other albums by searching Your Brother Should Know on all the usual poddy things. So, if you ask me, my brother Rob is an internationally renowned music journalist. If you ask Rob, he describes this as having slogged as an underpaid music writer in far-flung climes for 15-odd years. Either way, when we started Your Brother Should Know, I was aware that he had interviewed pretty much every rock-pop music star you could mention through our history. But I was nevertheless staggered by the amount of times when we were recording a podcast, I would ask him, "Have you heard of this person?" And he would say, "Heard of him? I had a nice chat with him a few years ago." So I shouldn't have been surprised when we did the Ultravox episode that Rob had in fact had a chinwag with the wonderful Midge Ure about 10 years before. Having now listened to said chinwag, I'm really chuffed that we're able to release it. I always thought Midge was probably a really nice bloke, and it's pretty clear from this that he absolutely is. And as ever, Rob is just a brilliant interviewer, with the precious ability to ask really direct questions in such a lovely, friendly way that his subjects can't wait to open up about their lives. If you're listening to this, you've probably already heard mine and Rob's perspective on Midge's career. So I hope you enjoy also listening to the man himself's perspective on his pretty remarkable life. Here's my brother having a really nice chat with the wonderful Midge Ure. And that is a sentence my 12-year-old self, or even my 30-year-old self, which is how old I was when I first met Rob, would be absolutely staggered that my 53-year-old self was saying.
I'm good. It's sunny here for a change.
Whereabouts we reached you?
I'm in Bath, in the West Country.
That's home for you, I understand, right?
Yeah, well, it's been home for 20-odd years now, yeah, so I love it. It's great.
Don't miss Glasgow?
I do. You know what? I think if because I've got loads of kids, it'd be a bit remiss of me to uproot them and take them all the way up to that foreign country for them. But I love it. You know, when I'm back there, I feel totally at home. Wander around Glasgow, in fact, anywhere in Scotland. And I keep thinking that someday, maybe if retirement ever calls, that's where I'll head.
Good to hear. I'm guessing you were all for independence in that case.
You know what? I would like to have seen the full deck of cards. I kept getting the feeling that so much a lot of it was smoke and mirrors. Yeah. And I know Alex Salmond, and I think he's a great politician. He's a great, raconteur and stuff, and a real strong motivator. But, you kind of think, really, why doesn't someone just print, this is what you'll get if you do it, and this is what you'll lose if you do it, and just put two columns and show everyone and let them decide. There's an awful lot of jingoism going on, and people being encouraged to paint their faces with wood and shout, "Cry freedom." There's a lot of Hollywood happening. So I was never sure. Weirdly enough, I wasn't allowed to vote anyway because I don't live there. But my daughter, who goes to Edinburgh University, who speaks like the Queen, she was allowed to vote. She voted against it.
Really? Okay. So you're diplomatically sitting on the fence. I see. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Excellent. Listen, before we go any further, can I just ask roughly how long I've got with you? Because there's a lot I'd like to ask, and I just want to work out.
They've got down 15 minutes slot.
Is that
here,
all? Okay, brilliant. We've
actually not been working because I've managed to miss one out so far and still overrun.
We best crack on in that case, because as I say, there's a great deal I'd love to ask you. I mean, first of all, this is your first gig in Dubai, I understand. No,
it's my second. First one with full band. I did a gig about 10 years ago, but completely solo acoustic. And it was lovely being there, but looking forward to going back, of course.
Oh, yeah, because a lot's changed in the last 10 years, really.
Well, I suppose it has. I mean, I think it was still... hasn't the bubble kind of burst a bit?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've seen documentaries over here about, supercars being left at airports and things with the keys still in them, and people, fleeing the country and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I did see your tweet about Dubai Airport being a huge shopping mall with a few runways glued on.
that was my experience of it. But I remember I was only there for like a couple of days, and we were flying to various places in the area, and I just seemed to spend most of my time not in a hotel but in an airport, which looked like a hotel.
Yes, indeed. But listen, no, what I meant by 10 years, I mean, it seems to be a huge change in your career and your life. It seems like the last few years have really seen you stepping out the shadows. Brilliant and Fragile, two big releases, very different names, mixed messages there.
Well, not necessarily different names, but different vehicles, I suppose. It's all the same. It's all the same thought process. I suppose reviving Ultravox was a real oddity. 5 or 6 years ago, whenever that was, and then finally recording a new album with Ultravox was never on the cards. So it's been a real surprise.
You didn't really want to do it, I understand.
I thought it was a step too far. I honestly, and who wouldn't? You think. You get a bunch of people together after a 25-year break. We broke up 25 years ago. Why would we get together and try and write something new? The idea of going out and performing the old songs again, great. That's not a problem. That would have been great, and that was enough for me. But it was halfway through the tour when we were approached by record companies suggesting that they'd like to make an album with us, and I just thought no, because Warp's little mind, would you think that after 25 years apart that you'd still have some spark of creativity together? And of course, even though I said no, and the moment we started talking about, well, how could we do it? If we were going to do it, how would we do it? The moment you have that initial conversation, you're in, and of course we'd had those conversations sitting in the car or backstage or whatever, where would we do it if we were good? How could we do it logistically? And that was it. You sucker bin, and it was a pleasant surprise to find out that after the first 2 weeks of kind of writing and recording, that it was still lying dormant. It was there, ready to go.
But as I say, you did call it brilliant, which is a brilliant, a great statement of intent. Yet your own one was as I say, Fragile. It is a mixed message. It feels like, what was going on in your head for that process?
Well, a lot happens in 10 years, and people talk about, decades in music, and they say, oh yeah, the 80s was a great period for music. Some of it was, parts of it were, but you've got to remember that the back end of the 80s was pretty dire. It wasn't interesting at all. It was radically different. 10 years is a long time. So yeah, I suppose, with Ultravox, it was right now, and the whole idea of calling it brilliant was self-effacing, I suppose. It was, right. It was, it was talking about, how brilliant you thought you were.
Yeah.
How you thought that everything you ever did turned to gold, and looking back at those halcyon days, and self-deprecating, I should say, not self-effacing, and kind of taking the piss out of yourself for it. You, the brilliant thing you are, outshine the brightest star. You think, that's how you used to feel, because everyone told you were this wonderful thing. So, and I suppose the parallel to that would be brilliant in the fact that we actually got together and made this thing. We did it. Whereas Fragile had actually started, many years before Ultravox got back on the scene. I started the Fragile album 10 years before it was released. So, and I started it around quite possibly my darkest period. 10 years, just over 10 years ago, I found myself in serious trouble with alcohol. So I was about to lose everything. My family, my livelihood, I'd lost my way, I had no indication of where I was heading. So that album was when I started to recover and started writing about my life at the time, good and bad. So it was absolute honesty. So it was holding your hand up and saying, hold on, I thought I was brilliant. I thought I was this wonderful character who could carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. But I can't, I'm only human. I fall apart. And I wrote about that. So yes, you're quite right. I hadn't even thought of the fact that those albums came out, a couple of years apart, were being written at the same time, but on different tracks.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Can I ask you, what was it that pulled you out of that dark period? What was the inspiration that you needed to kind of recover?
My family, realizing that it's an incredibly selfish thing to do. Any kind of addiction is a selfish thing, because you think that it's only you're affecting, and of course you're not. The ripples that you create are huge, and they travel a long way. And I was ruining everything for everyone. And I saw it in my daughter's eyes, and she caught me with a bottle. And when I lied to everybody saying I wasn't drinking, so that moment was enough to jolt me back into reality. And I stopped. I've done still for 10 years now. So I haven't touched a drink since then.
So it was your children that pulled you out, but conversely, I understand it was the death of your father that pushed you over the edge in the first place.
It was, I can't blame it all on that, but it was what moved it up a gear. I think feeling very, very sorry for myself and feeling a bit lost. It's that, and amongst a wealth of other things, being signed to a record label I didn't want to be with, and who didn't want me. Just losing my focus, my drive. I couldn't even take myself into the studio anymore. I had nothing to write, I had nothing to say. Put all of that in a big cauldron and mix it all up, and then add the death of your father, and then you go, whoa, and that was it. It was just too much. It was, I had some form of I presume, some form of breakdown. And I couldn't deal with any of it at all on a daily basis. So I hid from it all, and I hid, behind a piece of glass.
I mean, when was this breakdown? Would you say it was affecting your work in the 80s, or was it much later?
Oh, much later.
Yeah.
It was much later. Yeah. No, it was about maybe, I suppose it moved up a gear 12, 13 years ago.
Okay.
And it just got out of control,
Yeah. And let's go way back from it, because I'd like to touch upon some of the great things you've achieved. I understand you didn't grow up in the most prosperous surroundings. Was music something of an escape back then? Was it a golden road out of that environment?
No, it was pure fantasy. I mean, the only entertainment we had, I suppose, in this tenement flat was a kind of television in the corner and a radio. So my musical education was the radio. And it took me out of my world. A bit like when you read a book, it takes you into a different world. Well, I didn't really read when I was a kid, but I listened to music, and that transported me elsewhere. And it wasn't a desire to get away from what I had that made me interested in music. It was, I suppose, I don't know, the desire to be appealing. I think it was just a geeky kid, and you thought that if you had a guitar strapped around your neck, that all of a sudden you'd be incredibly attractive to girls, which worked. I have to say, it worked for a while. So it was probably that. I was rubbish at sport, and Glasgow, everyone else was a great footballer, and I was crap. I wasn't interested. So while they were dreaming of, playing at Ibrox, I was dreaming of, playing at Ibrox, but on a stage.
Yeah. So it wasn't escape, it was attention. But did you ever sit down and say, I want to make a living out of this, or was it something you just kind of found yourself doing?
It was absolute fantasy. I mean, the reality was, Scotland was a musical desert. We had bands and we had places to play. We had no record labels. We had no management companies. We had very few agents. So the reality of becoming successful in your chosen career without moving to London, which was the kind of centre of it all, it was nonsense. So I don't know quite what I was thinking. It was just, you saw your favourite bands on Top of the Pops on television. You thought, well, that's what I really want to be doing that. What a cool thing to do. And then, of course, as you start to grow up a little bit and your musical taste change, you discover, the British blues boom. You start finding, Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and Peter Green, and you want to become a guitarist, and you want to. So you grow as your ideas morph and change as you get that little bit older. Each year, there's something else that you discover. The idea of making a living out of this, the idea of doing this as a full-time job was ridiculous. To me, it was just absolute fantasy. Me and the guitar, and then of course you meet other guys with a guitar, and you start to form a little band, and it just grows from there.
Well, if you needed any indication that you had made it, sure, your first number one must have been the moment. I mean, how did that feel? It was still pretty early in your career with Silk.
It Well, it was, and it was a bittersweet experience, I have to say. I mean, I remember getting a phone call. We just got a phone at home in the new house, which still had no heating. And I remember getting a phone call from one of the songwriters, Bill Martin, to say, "You're number one. How does that feel?" And I thought, well, I didn't write the song and I didn't produce the record, and I wasn't even allowed to play on the record. It was the same guys who played all the Bay City Rollers tunes. It was the same session guy, because that's how they dealt with artists at the time. And I just felt completely cold. I find myself on top of the pops on the number one record, and I've got all the adulation, which is the initial thing that I thought would be interesting, and none of the acclaim, because I didn't deserve any. And it's a really weird, bittersweet experience. And within 6 months of that happening, we broke the band up. I left the band because it was just nonsense. It wasn't what I had in my head. It didn't tick my boxes,
Which was a very brave decision to walk away from that success. And another brave one, obviously, was, I'm sure you're sick of asking this, but turning down the Pistols, is that a regret looking back, or?
No, not at all. I didn't know it was the Pistols at the time. I knew it was Malcolm McLaren. That I was talking to, because he told me. But he was putting a band together, but he didn't ask if I was a musician. And I was thinking, well, this is parallel to what I've got right now. This is, it's not my thing. I've been stopped for ulterior motives. I was stopped because of how I looked rather than any ability that I had. And that didn't make any sense to me.
So is that why Rich Kids was more appealing?
Rich Kids were a great little band, they're frantic and all over the shop, and a bit like trying to grab Mercury, but it was great. So it was a real band. When I got the phone call from Glenn asking me to come to London and have a play, it was incredibly exciting, because this was, of course, like a year after I was asked to join the Pistols, or a year and a bit. So what was happening in London, I was still in Glasgow, was everywhere. I was consuming the John Peel show every night. Listen to the adverts in session, or all the dub music they were playing. John Peel was pioneering at the time. So so the idea of coming down to London and just dipping my toe in that water for a little bit was hugely exciting. So the first day that I got there, we went into a rehearsal room with Glenn and Rusty and Steve, and we learned 3 songs. Went out that night and played the 3 songs at 3 different venues. We went up and opened up for the Police, because their opening act didn't turn up, so we played the Angel Islington, and we did 3 songs there. And then we went to a warehouse party with the Clash and Susie and the Banshees, and all these guys, Sid and Nancy were there. Went up, played the 3 songs there, and then later on we went to the Camden Palace, or whatever it was called at the time, and Boomtown Rats were playing, and I played the 3 songs there. And I thought, this is brilliant, this is just unbelievable. So it was just hugely exciting,
And you've been in London how long then?
24 hours.
24 hours.
24 hours, and I'd met everybody. It was just ridiculous,
And it's hard to imagine a more guitar-centric sound than Rich Kids, really. But obviously, you're talking about the sound of the 80s, and that's I don't know how you feel you've got the credit you deserve for bringing the synth to prominence, but that great divide between the guitar and synth, how did that lead to what came next?
Well, it's quite easy. I mean, in the Rich Kids, it was a very short-lived thing. We only made 1 album, but Rusty, the drummer, Rusty Egan, and I were listening to a lot of music that was coming out of Europe at the time. So we were playing all these tunes to each other. And in fact, Rusty had started a little club in London. He took over a club called Billy's, and on a Tuesday or Thursday evening, I think it was, he would do a thing called Bowie Night, and he'd go in and play all this electronic music that we were listening to, and that was the forerunner to Blitz. So I was so inspired by this stuff. I wanted to merge this new synthesis, this new technological revolution that was going on at the time. So I wanted to merge this synthesizer with traditional rock instruments. So I bought a synthesizer and brought it into the Rich Kids, and we did Marching Men, I think, was a track that featured the synth synth and whatever. And Glenn hated it. Glenn and Steve absolutely hated this thing, and it split the band in two. So Rusty and I took the synthesizer, went off and put our ideal band together, which was Visage.
Yeah.
You know, all our favourite musicians. And, of course, Visage featured Billy Currie, keyboard player from Ultravox.
Yeah, and the rest, I suppose, is history. But then there was that bit in the middle where I understand you're in 3 bands at once.
Well, I was putting the finishing touches to the first Visage album as a producer and a writer. So this was my first foray into actually being allowed to do what I wanted to do. So I was writing and producing this stuff. I had just joined Ultravox, although nobody was particularly interested in Ultravox at the time because they'd just come back from tour, a broken band. So I joined Ultravox, and I got a phone call from Phil Lynott, saying, you know, we're on tour in America, can you come out and finish the tour? So I went off and did that, but knowing all the time that I was coming back to Ultravox, because we'd started working together, we'd started writing and things, that I was coming back to Ultravox, because that was my band, you know, that was what I was there to do. You know, had I pushed it, I could probably have ended up as a guitarist in Thin Lizzy, as a permanent job, but it wasn't my thing. It was great fun, and I loved it. It was fabulous, but it was fabulous because I knew I was going back to this thing that was hideously exciting. You know, this hybrid of electronics and traditional rock instruments. It was just great. And who better to do it with than Ultravox, you know?
But surely Thin Lizzy were one of the biggest bands in the world at that time. You must have thought twice about it.
They were huge.
Yeah.
They were huge. It was great, you know, but it was like, I don't know, being an extra in Spinal Tap. It was wonderful. And I was very fortunate to be in America at the end of the 70s, the end of that great 70s kind of corporate rock period. And Lizzy, even then, didn't fit with that. They weren't Journey and Styx and Boston and Foreigner. Lizzy were something different. So even they felt like fish out of water, you know, touring that period. But what a great way to experience it all. It was just this mad Spinal Tap world. But yeah, it was fabulous. But I didn't want to join Thin Lizzy. I wanted to do my own thing. You know, I would have been doing something akin to what I did with Slick. I would have been not handing the reins over to someone else, as opposed to sharing the reins and holding the reins. It was very much Phil's thing, you know, I would have been one of a succession of guitarists, as opposed to, you know, the guy helping kind of carve out the route.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem you've been in lots of different projects at this point in your career of varying success and variation. You like them, varied styles. So would you say that Ultravox was very much the kind of culmination of that? This was when you were finally getting to do what you wanted, and that's why you stuck around. Would that be fair?
You know, yeah. Well, if you take Slick out of the equation, because I say that it had nothing to do with how that was going, controlling that. But the Rich Kids, buying a synthesizer inside the Rich Kids, it was the start of it, and then taking the synthesizer after the Rich Kids broke up and creating Visage, and through that joining Ultravox. Ultravox were, you know, people put Visage and Ultravox in the same category, and I don't. I think of them as very different things. Visage was written specifically to play in, you know, the clubs that Rusty and Steve Strange were running in London at the time. It was a means to an end. You do it and you think it's fantastic, it's great, it's exciting, and I'm learning how all this studio stuff works. But Ultravox were very much an established band, not a big successful band, but an established band and a proper band. So joining them, I was all of a sudden kind of, you know, I was scratching my creative itch. You know, I was there doing something that I felt I was part of, as opposed to, you know, just kind of hanging on to the tail end of.
And for many fans, that would obviously be your best known work. Would that be the work you're proudest of?
I'm very proud of a lot of the stuff we did back then. You know, when I look back now and listen to anything I did in the past, there are moments of absolute bewilderment. You know, I've got no idea what I was thinking when I did this, because it's not very good. But that's hopefully a sign of progress, or just old age, who knows. But, you know, you look back far enough and you think, it's not really doing it for me, I don't get it. But on the other hand, there are many things that we did back then that still stand the test of time. You know, when you hear Vienna on the radio now, which is one of the first things we'd written, it still stands out because it's kind of timeless, a bit like a bit like Blade Runner, you know, or Batman. You don't know what period it's set in, you know. So that's kind of timeless. It's electronic, but it's mainly piano or viola. So it's got this timeless essence to it, which is a really difficult thing to pull off.
And I'm sure it's still the highlight of your live shows today. I mean, when you come out here, how much Ultravox can we expect, and is there anything from any of the other projects?
Oh, there's a reasonable amount. I mean, I'm starting from early Ultravox days, not in chronological order, but I'm delving into the Ultravox stuff and some of the Visage stuff and solo stuff. So it's not just all solo material. So there are hits in there that people will obviously recognise, but I try and keep it a really well-balanced set. So taking it right up to maybe even something off, the Fragile album, or maybe something off the Brilliant album, which is the latest Ultravox record. So yeah, fair cross section.
Fantastic, yeah. And obviously the big thing that I'm afraid you can't escape any interview without coming up. I mean, Band-Aid, there's very little you can probably say you haven't said before, but tell me, how does it feel looking back on that legacy? It must be a bit surreal.
It's surreal, but kind of pleasing in a way. I mean, there's not just because of what happened, but the fact that it kind of changed a lot of things. You know, when you're sitting, I've just done Chris Evans' Radio 2 Carfest this month. So Carfest he's doing for children in need. So you look at children in need, you look at comic relief, you look at comic relief. It's woven into the very fabric of our daily lives now. You know, every year there's a children in need, there's a comic relief, there's these huge events that create money, generate income for not just overseas aid, but aid in our own country. And you think, well, a lot of that stuff is our daily stuff now. We don't think of it as a big major event. It's just part of who we are. Well, it wasn't part of who we are or who we were 30 years ago. So doing something like Band-Aid was very radical. Although George Harrison had tried to do something similar with Concert of Bangladesh. Doing Live Aid was groundbreaking. It had never happened before on that scale. So a lot of what we did was really sticking our necks in a noose and seeing if we could pull it off. So yeah, I think the legacy that's been left is huge, although it's not in your face all the time. It's there, and of course the fact that it all started with a song, a Christmas record. It means that record is played every Christmas, and parents and teachers now explain to kids why that record was put together. So it's been handed down. It's now, you go and see kids are doing nativities, and they'll just launch straight into doing It's Christmas right after Jingle Bells, and nobody saw that. Nobody saw that was what was going to happen, but it has.
And it's a song which I understand you wrote the better half of, really. I mean,
well, I don't know, but I wrote the parts that didn't have much words. Bob was responsible for most of the lyrics. My main lyrical contribution was changing it from "and there won't be snow in Ethiopia this Christmas" to "there won't be snow in Africa," because Ethiopia does not scan in anybody's book. I was responsible for a lot of most of the music.
Yeah.
But it's not the best song in the world, but the original recording is still, I think, even though I say it myself, a very good record, because when it comes on and you're not expecting to hear it on the radio, and that opening clang, the hair in the back of your neck still stands up. You still get what it was all about.
Yeah, no, it must be your proudest moment in many ways, but it must also be something you're sick of talking about, I imagine. I mean,
it's part of what you've done. You can't. I talk about that the same way I talk about Slick.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly interested in talking about either, but it's part of my background, and I'd be very remiss to sit and go. It's a bit like David Bowie saying, "Well, just call me Bowie." Drop the David. You think, what? Yeah. Don't be stupid. So it is kind of part of who and what you are.
Yeah, and obviously there was G8, and then there was the 30th anniversary. Sorry, either Live 8 to G8, and then there's the 30th anniversary last year. Any more plans that you and Bob have cooked up to do anything else with it, or indeed something new on a similar? Do you think that could happen?
God, we hope not.
No.
Well, there's been loads of speculation as to whether there was going to be a live event to celebrate the 30th anniversary, and we decided a long time ago that no, that really wasn't going to happen. So no, I think we need a couple of younger guys to step in. Or get some new young upstarts to come along and grab the baton and run with that. As oldies, we're still there right now, but at some point we have to think about how and where and who to we hand this whole thing across to, because it has to be looked after when we're not here,
Well, there's not really any candidates though, are there? I mean, music's not what it used to be.
Not a lot. No, there aren't. But it's a different generation. Maybe they're not as driven as we were. So it'll come. It will happen. Someone will step up to the mark and deal with the person that will have to kind of hand it all over to.
Well, I imagine Chris Martin would be keen, but.
Chris Martin, yeah, he's one of the handful, isn't he? Chris and Bono and whoever. But then again, they're getting on as well. Chris Martin's the youngster. He's the young upstart.
And while we're on your mate Bob, I don't know if you know, but he plays the venue you play every year for St Paddy's Day, year in year out. I think he's doing it at least 12, 15 years. Has he told you anything about the gig, what to expect, or anything like that? I don't know how much you're in touch.
No, I can't compete with that. An Irishman playing St Patrick's Day in Dubai.
At the Irish Village,
I cannot get anywhere close to that. I'm sure it's a hoolie and I'm sure it's great fun. But now we have to do it under my own steam. St Patrick will not help me out in this one.
No, indeed. So looking at it all, everything we've just discussed, and obviously coming with the OBE and everything, do you have that sense of being a bit of a national treasure?
It's national treasure above or below legend, because I've noticed that a lot of the interviews I've been doing, the headlines say music legend Midge Ure. I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure I've attained that kind of national treasure status yet. So I don't know. It's just a very polite way of saying old bugger.
A limitless contribution, I'd say, but okay. And one we have to ask, looking back on it all, any regrets? All these bands that were you in for a short while, a long while, you could have done more with. I mean, what would you change if you did it all again?
You know what? None of it. Because you can't. It's like a deck of cards. You can't say, well, I'll just pull this one away from the bottom and then it'll look so much nicer. It's a foundation. It's, although I wasn't particularly happy with the outcome this league, it's part of, it would never have led me to, the Rich Kids. And the Rich Kids wasn't a great thing, but, I would never have found the synthesizer, and that would have never done, it never opened all the other doors. So I don't know where I would have been sitting right now if I changed any of that, because it affects everything. So I can't really go back. I mean, there's parts of it, and if you're writing, your ultimate, self-ego-driven autobiography where you polished up all the rough bits, there's bits that you'd think, well, I'll lose, not mention that at all. And of course, Rich Kids became a really huge, successful band, which it didn't. But each one of those little moments led to something else. It was a point. It was a stepping stone, and it was as I was building this path, and it's like anything. You turn left instead of turning right. You've no idea what's at the end of the road, and sometimes I've turned left when I should have turned right. But it's led me somewhere interesting. Maybe not the best place, but led me something interesting that's led to something else that's been interesting. So I can't complain.
Well, what about the last 20, 30 years, the post-Ultravox days? I mean, do you wish you'd done something different and maybe kept that band going a bit longer, or done something? I don't know.
I think the big regret with really is killing off Ultravox when things got rough or tough or difficult. And I think had we ridden out the storm, and resolved internal problems, who knows what would have happened. I think we would have come out with some really interesting music. It could have been, veering off down the more kind of Radiohead's, route. But we never gave it the chance. Just at the time, it seemed like the easiest way of coming out of any relationship, is to pull the plug and walk away, rather than work it all out and figure out, how you move forward. So that's a kind of regret. But then again, you do what you do at that moment in time because that's the right thing for you to do. And hindsight's a wonderful thing. We could all be brilliant with hindsight, but none of us have it.
Well, any chance you guys might do another one? You could call it excellent or amazing or
average. That's what I'm going to call the next one.
But no, seriously, might you do another record with those guys?
You know what? It's not out of the question. It's just something that we talked about when we were doing the last one, saying, well, we're not going to be pretending that we're back and we're going to make an album every 2 years like we used to. This is something that's interesting, and we were very pleased with how it turned out. And it was a lovely moment to kind of leave it on for a while. But the band is still there, still talking about, what we could possibly do if the right thing kind of turns up. But we're getting on a bit now, so we'll have to be quite selective about what we do. But the idea of doing something new is not completely out the window. But there are no plans on the table right now to do anything.
Anything else on the table at all? Any more So Good records? Anything else you want to achieve?
I've never planned anything. I don't have any major ambitions. There are many artists out there that I think that wouldn't it be great, doing a little bit of work with them, but this situation has to be right. It has to be organic. You cannot manipulate these things. I think we'll just have to see what we see. The great exciting thing about this industry is what pops through your mailbox in your computer, or who rings you on the phone and asks you, would you be interested in, and then you decide whether you want to or not. And it's usually things that you've never planned, that you never thought of. And that's what keeps it exciting.
So it was 10 years you were here last. Another 10 years, you reckon you'll still be at it and get another gig? What do you reckon?
If health permits, I don't see why. I've got no plans on retiring. It's not a job. It's kind of what I do. So I thoroughly enjoy it. I've been working live more in the last few years than I've ever done in my entire career. I'm travelling more and thoroughly enjoying it. So yeah, as long as people want to hear it, as long as I'm capable of standing up there and doing it, I'm going to carry on doing it. So who knows?
Beautiful. Fantastic. Listen, I'd love to chat to you all day. I had a million more questions, but I know that you're tight on time. So is there anything else you want to tell me before I get in trouble with the promoters here?
No, I think you've covered a fair amount.
I've done my best. Brilliant. Well, it's obviously a real privilege to chat to you, and we can't wait to have you out here. And yeah, thanks again.
Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to it.
Take care. All the best.
All right. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.